The themes of that interview yesterday and at the convention last week was this turning of the page that we heard the vice president talk about in the interview. The refrain, "We're not going back," talking about the dark years, in her view, of Donald Trump. Well, as you may have expected, Donald Trump weighed in on the interview yesterday. In fact, even before the interview, it was a pre-recorded conversation with the Daily Mail. Trump criticized Harris for not doing her interview live, claiming it shows she is, quote, "not very smart." Here's what Trump said.
Why isn't it live? It's not a live interview. It's an interview that's going to be taped and then edited and then put out. So that's not even an interview. Then she's doing it with her vice president sitting there. So she's not very smart. When they ask her a question that she can't answer, she'll just look at him. You answer it.
In a fundraising email after Harris's interview, the Trump campaign called her, quote, "the biggest liar ever to run for president." Some irony there, of course. The email also accused Harris of flip-flopping on those positions, something Trump has done repeatedly himself, including yesterday on abortion and IVF. We'll get into that in just a moment. So, Eddie, as we think about this campaign as a study in contrast, you couldn't help but think in a nonpartisan way, just watching Vice President Harris have a conversation with an interviewer that did not include insults, cheap shots, that did not include her personal vendettas, her personal grievances. She answered questions about policy soberly. You can agree or disagree with the policy positions, but you talk about contrast. Watch Donald Trump speak and post on social media, and watch Vice President Harris do that interview.
Willie, that's such an important point. I mean, you're right. During the interview with Vice President Harris, there were positions that we could sink our teeth in. There were positions where we could decide where do we stand. We actually had an adult in front of us. And then there's Donald Trump. And what Donald Trump requires of the American voter is that we get down in the mud, that we kind of go to our lesser angels, that we go to our base instincts. And we saw that in sharp contrast. And I think when Vice President Harris said that we wanted to leave behind an error, I think it's actually embodied and represented in the contrast in those interviews, Willie. One, trying to get us to think about our future and our present, and the other, trying to get us to think about our more base instincts, our fears, our grievances. And that's a contrast I think she should continue to make moving forward.
And what she's doing critically is not attacking Trump for what he is. She's telling us what he isn't. She's saying he is incapable of putting the country above himself. Because voters at this point know what Trump is. They know all the attacks. They know what a threat to our democracy he could be. But Kamala Harris is articulating, I think, a much more powerful statement about what 4 years of Trump would be, and it would just be selfishness. It would be chaos.
Absolutely.
And she's doing that by pointing out what he's incapable of. I think it's also critical to point out, to Sam's point about the identity politics aspect of this all, and how the Democratic Party really seems to have turned the page on this. I don't think that's so much about de-emphasizing the historic nature of her candidacy. I think it's about not making the campaign about herself. You're not hearing the slogans, "I'm with her," right? She wants to make this about the American people and how she will take us forward into a different kind of era, a kind of politics where we are not at each other's throats at the Thanksgiving dinner table, where we can once again, as you say, feel like the better angels of our nature are still there and need to be nurtured. So, I think she's very wisely making this about the country and bringing the country back together, rather than saying, this is about me, this is who I am. And you already have one candidate who is doing that quite well.
And by the way, the Harris campaign is happy to have Donald Trump step into the void every time like that, make it about himself, give the insults, and give them the chance to say, this is what we're talking about. Turn the page. We don't want to go back. NBC's Ali Vitale, great job on Way Too Early this week. Great to have you with us. Thanks so much, Ali. Appreciate it as always.